Giulia emailed me in lockdown and asked me to be part of this show. I felt really incredibly honoured and said yes immediately. And it's been a brilliant kind of journey to go on with Giulia. Giulia's done all the work. I just sort of tried to answer some questions as best I could and provide the drawing of that Giulia. But when Giulia first approached me, it was really around a drawing that felt was kind of pivotal for me in my kind of own development. So the drawing, I hope you can see, my drawings are incredibly subtle. They don't translate well in terms of reproduction. I have brought one along, but it's all like it's invisible from this distance, and that's part of what I play with in the drawings around pictorial space and how we see it. But so the drawing here I made in 2011. So it's quite an old piece, but I wouldn't know it particularly because once these drawings began to develop for me, there was a period of change in my own practice, where drawing became centre stage, if you like. I found a way of working which was where I felt I could kind of dwell with the image and dwell on the surface. So many of these drawings are only incrementally different from one another. So that's the first thing I can say. But I'm going to just read you the first question, the first answer from the that Giulia posed to us, all as artists. And I think it's actually such a brilliant and difficult question. And it's, can you please summarise your practice in a few lines for readers that might not be familiar with your work? I thought, like, what a really straightforward, what a really good testing kind of question for any of us to have to do. And this is my attempt to answer it. I said, my drawings consist of small points made by a manual marking of the surface of white paper with pencils of different gradations and ordered sequences. So I hope that makes sense. In this practice, drawing is reduced to the elementary activity of making one mark after another through a series of point-to-point connectors. Each drawn work is developed through a systematic production structure mark making designed to activate a field of vision in which the untouched whiteness of the paper is of equal status to the drawing intervention. Every small drawn mark on the paper surface becomes a trace of that action that creates pictorial space and optical transformation. Characterized by repetition stasis, these drawings impose their own discipline and moment-to-moment awareness. Each work explores and develops reticence, duration, and deceleration of visual acuity, which are likened to a form of meditative practice. Each drawing inhabits a seemingly paradoxical position between geometrical structures alongside fluctuations of touch and embodied making. That was my attempt to answer that question. And then Giulia, not only with that question, in number 2 said, could you describe your work to someone who can't see it? They're really tough questions. You're really, the questions that Giulia was giving us as artists were really forcing us to sort of think about what's happening on the surface of the paper, what's happening there. And for me, drawing is about the surface of the paper, or should I say about the surface in general. It doesn't have to be paper. And I'll say perhaps something that I think, I don't know, maybe it's contentious, that drawing needs a surface. It needs a surface and it needs a tool to mark that surface. And as soon as maybe this is a very simplistic kind of view of what drawing is or might be, and it probably doesn't take into account expanded notions of drawing. But it's a drawing, a surface, and a tool. And those two things come together more often than not through the hand and the eye. Not necessarily so, but that. And as soon as you make that mark with that tool, and you choose that tool, that's an intentional as we saw in the workshop from Zoe and Vanessa, there's a range of tools out there, and we were asked to put things on the different things on the end of sticks. Each one of us then made a decision. A piece of chalk, pencil, pen, whatever. We made a choice about the colour, and then we began to make choices instinctively or deliberately, however, about that. As soon as those marks hit the surface and interact with the surface is activated in a way that is engaging one both physically, optically. So, and we know this, we need to draw one line on the surface of a piece of paper, and the space of that piece of paper changes. You draw two lines, space is played like that. It's very, it's the transformation of a mark into a visual thing. So that's not a better word. This is the drawing. It's a small drawing. Most of my drawings are relatively small by kind of contemporary standards. It's kind of about 40 centimetres square. So it's a bit bigger than it would be in real life. So as I said, every mark is an elementary mark. It's a mark where, when I began to turn to drawing some years ago, I experimented with lots of different forms of mark making, and in the end I ended up settling on the most basic, elemental kind of mark I felt I could make at that time, and that was a dot or a point. But as we can see from this really enlarged detail, not one, as hard as I would try, and I do try hard, believe me, to make the same mark, you can't make the same mark. Every one of these is an individualized kind of mark that happens through the hand and through the touch, and through the action of the tool that you're using, the pencil. And I liken these marks to kind of simply to moments in time. Everyone is a moment in time. They operate individually, but they also operate in terms of the spaces they create in relation to each other, and the space they create, pictorial space they create as a whole when they all come together. So, in a way, I'm not dotting, that would be probably wrong. I'm not pointing like that, making a mark. I'm not making a mark, which is so I'm making these you could argue these are gestural drawings, but they're the tiniest gesture that I can kind of possibly make. That's a different drawing, but it's a detail of the drawing as they come together. Some of the drawings I've kind of subtly ruled pencil lines between every dot. I'm joining the dots. This is what's happening here. As I say, they're all about the kind of undulation of the pictorial space that is created through the mark making. The drawings are kind of, I have a whole range of drawing tools. All 16 grades of Pastel graphite pencils. I have every size, different width, nib size of the mechanical pencils, and I have different grades of lead, and I use a very narrow range of those, I guess, in the end, which is mostly around the sort of HB, H, 2H kind of spectrum. And I work up the drawings through different kind of stages. It's a different process and different stage as the drawing takes place. So the first is kind of realizing a kind of structure. It's almost like creating a territory or creating a map. And then there's another stage where that drawing is kind of beginning to take shape. So there's two really distinct stages in the process. And it's slow, and it's methodical, and it's time consuming. I'm going to read you another quote if you can find it. and Giulia touched on it about time. The question you asked the artists about time, you said, brought up quite a few good kind of responses, and I answered the question about how long it took, or it takes, and the relationship between time and the making of the drawing. And I said something about you can kind of quantify it in a kind of matter-of-fact kind of way. You know, the length of time it takes from the first drawn mark to the last drawn mark. And then I sort of said something about the fact that you can also build in the whole time that it takes in terms of structuring and preparing the drawing, rather than the drawing itself. You might be doing studies in order to make the drawing itself in that kind of way. And also that drawings come out of other drawings. So there's a whole kind of sense that can be built into my answer to that question. But I also said that these drawings, they're not made in one sitting. They're never made in one sitting. They're too far too long for that. They're made over periods of days and weeks and even months and so on. They're very, very slow. And I said that I draw in the morning before I come here. I tend to get up at 6-ish and I tend to draw. Sometimes it's for 10 minutes, sometimes it's for an hour. But I work on a regular, methodical kind of basis. I can't draw when I come back home after being here for a day. I can do nothing but watch sort of Line of Duty or something like that. But setting aside so I can stop and start the drawing at any point once it gets going. That's really important for me. And by doing that, I kind of feel that I don't need, I talk about the drawings in terms of meditative practice or meditative process. I don't need to be in a kind of zone to make these drawings. Once the drawing is in a kind of flow, I can begin it and I can stop it and I can pick it up again at any time. But the bit I'm trying to get to here that I think is that the drawings impose their own time upon me as a maker. I can't draw these drawings any faster or any slower than they allow me to. So they actually kind of give me the sense of time. It's the drawing and the drawing method that imposes its pace upon me. And I find that incredibly fascinating. You know, it allows me to, I can't hurry it. I can't slow it down. I have to go with it in the kind of way that it goes. So, and what it enables is a kind of very slow unfolding nature of the drawing process. Right, these are visible. These are 3 recent drawings made 11 years apart from the drawings at the beginning. You can see that I'm not in any sense with this kind of trying to sort of constantly kind of reinvent the drawing. I'm trying to stay with the drawing, I'm trying to stay with the idea, and I'm trying to dwell on the surface of the drawing. It's about being present through the kind of activity. So, I think that might be it. Yeah, so it's sort of incremental shifts and changes, and the drawings are very much about perception, bringing our attention to things, and also concerned with how we interact with the drawing, any particular drawing. So a drawing, these drawings are invisible from a certain distance. They appear to be an empty frame, an empty space. But as you move towards it, the combinations of marks begin to register on the eye, and as you become close to it, you can kind of get involved with every individual mark. So there's a sort of that kind of stages of how we kind of read drawings is also interesting. These are not the only drawings I make, by the way, but these are a very particular kind of set of work that's ongoing.